Those rusty fence posts, good result of my calloused hands, like the lonely life.
Rusty Fence Posts podcast, an all breed podcast where we talk about everything dogs. Today I'm joined by Rachel Hattig, owner of Corso. Welcome to the podcast, Rachel.
Thank you.
So I've been following your YouTube channel and kennel for several years, and I'm a fan. I've always appreciated your advocacy and passion for the Corso breed. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the dog world and into the Corso breed?
Sure.
Okay.
So I originally I bred pit bulls, and when I was younger, not nearly as serious as I am with the Corso. And then I got out of that for a while, and I was training dogs for a couple years, and then I went into like the corporate world and had a job and did that whole bit, and then slowly got back into the dogs, kind of realized that I had a passion for it, and it kind of took off from there. And so always been around dogs, always loved dogs. It's always been a big part of my life. But the Corso specifically, when I knew that I wanted to get another dog and I knew I wanted to breed, but I didn't want to, when I'd had the pit bulls, it was a lot of work, and I'm gonna be honest, I just didn't want to work that hard anymore. And so they're just a bit more high maintenance, and I wanted to kind of have something that wasn't quite as high maintenance, but I always loved the big, powerful, intimidating kind of dogs. And so when I was looking, the Corso appealed to me because they were still a relatively rare breed at the time. And so I didn't feel like I would be adding to any kind of issue with, overpopulation or anything like that. And they really just appealed to me, and for being a very healthy breed still. Like when it comes to the Mastiffs, they were still pretty healthy. And so that's what I think drew me to them.
So during that time when you kind of started up with the pit bull and Corso, and later on into the Corsos, did you have a mentor?
When I was breeding pit bulls, no. And that definitely was a big hindrance, because I kind of just was, blindly making my way through, which is not the way that you want to be going through a breed. I will say that because of that, I ended up working with lines that, had I known better, I would have probably avoided. And with the Corso, I do have a mentor, actually I have a couple, not somebody that ever really kind of volunteered to be that, although that's what they are. They weren't really looking to be a mentor. It's just that we got along, and it just kind of developed into that. But I will say that I do feel that to be a good breeder, you almost have to have, it's not that you have to have a mentor. You can do it without it, but you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And it's a lot easier if you have a mentor, somebody that you can trust.
Yes, ma'am. I completely understand that. I guess what I'm coming with my next question. Can you give us a little bit of history on the breed, as far as where the Corso was bred from and what it was intended to be bred for?
Sure. So originally the breed was in Italy. They were a kind of an all-around farm dog and guard dog, and over time they kind of like many breeds, as the kind of industrial revolution happened, they became less valuable, less needed. And so they began to go extinct. And there was a group of enthusiasts, a couple people, Dr. Berber was one of them, and then a couple breeders, Vito and DeVere, which is Deldirium. He's kind of the godfather of the breed. And so there were a couple enthusiasts who started to collect dogs from the countryside. And so those dogs became the kind of foundation for the breed. And there were a couple of lines that stemmed from there. Now, that's the story of the European dogs. Now, the American dogs is a completely different story because it's actually a completely different breed. Some have been intermixed, but the American stock was basically started, unfortunately, from a lie. There's a gentleman that is Italian. He went to Italy. He saw that about this breed. He heard about it, and he was already a Rottweiler breeder and a Neapolitan Mastiff breeder. And so what he did is he came over here and he started mixing those dogs, and they called them Cane Corso. And so that's why in America, if you look through the pedigrees of the dogs being bred, the earliest dogs being bred, at the same time that you look at the European dogs, you will see that they don't look anything alike. And that's because they're different breeds. And so those American stock is basically, depending upon the breeder, some preferenced a Rottweiler base, some preferenced a Neapolitan Mastiff base. And but they each had those two in, as well as other Mastiffs. And we did find out, we did confirm that to be true, which many people had already suspected. But we did confirm that in an independent 2017 study that was done that tested the DNA of 3 Italian breeds in Italy and then in America. And what they found was that 2 of those were the same. So the Neapolitan Mastiff and the Italian Greyhound were the same no matter where they were tested. But the Cane Corso was literally so different, they could not be grouped as the same breed. And what they said was that the American stock grouped with the Neapolitan Mastiffs that had already been tested per that study. And they also had significant Rottweiler mixing as well as other Mastiffs. And it doesn't specify, it just says other Mastiffs. So what a lot of people had already suspected and accused these breeders of doing basically was verified. And so there's been a push to rectify that by a lot of breeders by not, but if you have American lines, a lot of people have been trying to fix them by mixing the European stock in and kind of moving away from that. And then there are these breed enthusiasts here in America, which are very much still singing the song of their people. And they promote those dogs. They only believe in those dogs. And so they believe in preserving those dogs. So it's 2 technically different breeds under the same name here in the States.
Well, that was exactly my next question was, is there a difference between the Euro-bred Corso and the American-bred Corso? And I know on social media I've seen pictures of where they're so-called Corsos and they're so big and bulky that, you know, they almost seem kind of like a bully. It's like if they ran 15 or 20 yards, they wouldn't be able to breathe and their tongue would be hanging out. But I know just in the difference in what I see on the dogs you have in your kennel versus others, your dogs seem to be more streamlined, more athletic looking. And I was just going to ask you, which you already explained, what the difference was.
Yes. So I will say they often claim their dogs are bigger. They're not necessarily bigger. I mean, some of them can be because I believe that some of them have been mixing English Mastiff in, but traditionally they do have a more bully-like appearance. So they like a shorter dog, but they like a wider dog. They like a much heavier dog. So they'll brag about their dog being, 150 pounds, but then when you see it in person, to me, that's not impressive because it's not a particularly large dog. The European Corso are very large dogs, make no mistake, but they are still capable of moving. So Like I have a dog named Mad Mortigan who's, 145 pounds, and that is definitely very, very large, but he's tall and he's well built. And so he can still run. He does not get overly tired. They can think of like an Irish wolfhound type of dog. You can still be big and move. You just cannot be big and wide and move. And that's one of the big things that American breeders often they just don't pay any attention to it, because honestly they don't even care about that. It's all about the looks. It's not about the functionality. And so yeah, their dogs, there's obviously variances in every line, and even within, bully dogs, some of them are not near, they're just small, they're not near as wide and bulky. But I've owned both, and what I will tell you is, aside from the looks, the worst thing about the American lines is the temperaments. They have very, very bad temperaments. They have fear issues. They are skittish. They're fear biters. They're touch sensitive. So when you go to touch them around the rear, they will bite. There's a pretty, in our community, a viral video that was going around at the Nationals, AKC Nationals, where a very high profile breeder's bloodlines a dog directly from his bloodlines on both strains. Both parrots were from his kennel. The dog, I'm not sure if it connected or not, but it did lunge at the judge. And and you could see that the dog was afraid the whole time. And this is a dog that was, I want to say, 5 or 6 years old, was already, I believe, a grand champion, had been in many shows. There's really no excuse for the behavior. But and even I think a couple Westminsters ago, we had a dog that was excused. She was picked for our breed, best of breed, but she was excused from the group showing because she was just falling apart in the ring. And so, there's lots of evidence of these dogs having very unstable temperaments, and then they go into people's homes, and then the breeders just blame the owners. And so I've seen it enough times, and I try to warn people all the time, you don't have to buy a dog from me, but before you just go around buying sight unseen, at least make sure you can pet the parents. And that's a difficult thing to say to people when you're dealing with a breed like this, that is a protection breed, a guardian breed, but that's the only way that you can guarantee that those dogs are not like that. Because and even then, you can't guarantee that the offspring won't be like that, because not every single puppy in an American bred litter is going to act like that, but a bunch of them do. And I get calls all the time, and I will literally tell them exactly all the behaviors, and they're just dumbfounded that I'm describing to them their dog that I've never met, like to the T. And so it's very much genetic. And that, to me, is the biggest problem, because those dogs end up in situations that they, for example, there was a dog that mauled a child in New York that was, I looked at the videos very clearly, or the pictures of the dog, very clearly an American bred Corso, very neo-looking dog. And but the headline just says Cane Corso. It doesn't say the truth about those dogs. So I speak about it not as a way of being vindictive, not as a way of trying to limit competition, but so as to make sure that people know that there are two different breeds that are going under the same name. One of them is not like that. And so I really do try to stress that.
So do Corsos kind of carry that stereotype of, let's say, a pit bull terrier or a band dog, as to where, in an unfortunate incidents to where a child or a person is mauled, do they kind of, you have your Eurobred, American bred, is there a stereotyping of the breed?
Definitely. Yeah, I'm dealing with that right now. I've got a neighbor who's very adamantly against me and trying to make it impossible for me to live here, because her her husband was attacked by a Cane Corso, I think a pair of them, and I guess they killed their emu. And so they are very much against me, but the reality is that true Corso won't leave their property. They have no interest in anything off their property. They have no interest with anything that's not their family, and they do not have high prey drive. The American stock does, because they and that's a big thing that a lot of people don't realize when they're breeding. That's why the pit bull name has been ruined too, because of the bully dogs. And so the original pit bull terrier is a terrier, and they're not human aggressive. But when you mix them with bulldogs, with mastiffs that do have fear of humans and do think of humans as a potential threat, that's when you all of a sudden have problems. And it's the same thing with these Corso. The Rottweiler in them those dogs have been trained for a very long time and bred for a very long time for bite work. And bite work, dogs that are used for those sports, that requires prey drive, not a guardian drive, not a protection drive, but prey drive. And when you don't understand the nuances and temperament and the way that it affects the way that a dog is, then you'll just willy-nilly breed things together and not realizing it. And so in the case of the pit bull, you take this don't stop tenacity of a terrier, right? The that prey drive, and then you take that and you stick that with the American bulldog and the mastiffs that they mixed in to make them bigger and wider, and even the bulldog, the English bulldog, has protection drive, and so like a suspicion towards people. So you take that suspicion, right, of towards people that the original pit bull breeders knew to never do. And then you mix that with this really non-thinking, just drive of the terrier to just get in there and take care of business. And that's how you ended up with this kind of not epidemic, but a bunch of these pit bull labeled dogs that were mauling people and you couldn't get them off. And that was never the true pit bull. And in the case of the Corso, it's a very similar thing. Of a Corso is a thinking breed. They are more calm. When you have a breed that is used for like on a farm, and particularly with livestock guardianship, although I would not consider the Corso to be as good as a livestock guardian, they do have the ability to do some of that stuff. And one of those traits is that when you have a threat, like say a wolf, a wolf and a coyote, they're oftentimes pack hunters. And so one of them will come in and try to distract the protector while the other ones slip in behind. And so if your protector gets sidetracked by that one individual and goes in to fight and chase that individual, it leaves the prey items, the livestock, unguarded. So what you really want is a dog that addresses that threat, but stays with the livestock, right? And is constantly staying with them and kind of pushing back just enough, but staying with the livestock. So whereas the other breeds, like the dogs that have that high prey drive, you're talking your Shepherds, your Malinois, your Rottweilers, your Dobermans, those ones go out, they meet the threat, they lock on, they engage with that threat with single-minded focus. And so when you have these Corso that are bred like that, they are like that. They're going to run out and they're going to bite first, ask questions later. A good Corso won't do that. A good Corso will look at they'll look at the situation. They'll make it very clear that you need to back up, that you need to, they'll set a boundary, and you have to really be asking for it to get bit by like a good Corso. The other ones, you don't have to be doing really nothing wrong other than being at the wrong place, wrong time, or maybe the dog got out, or whatever. But it's they're the worst thing about the American stock is more often than not I hear about them endangering their owners. And so, like, a guy called me last night, very exact same situation, wanted to know about his bloodlines, very well-known breeder, that where his dog comes from, and he was like, he had seen some things that I had posted about this person because I had bought some dogs from him, and I had was very honest about what I was experiencing. And so he contacts me, and I literally told him exactly what the dogs do, and he was like, that's exactly what my dog is doing. And he goes, and now he's coming at me, he's challenging me, and trying to attack him, and that's not an uncommon thing. And so it's It's horrible. But there's only so much that we can do because those breeders are still mostly around. The breed has only been in recovery for about 40 years. And so a lot of the early breeders here in America are still breeding. And they have this reputation because they've been in it so long, and nobody talks about these things. And when somebody does, they get shut down by the rest of the people who are all breeding those same lines. So here in America, it's very difficult to find the truth about those dogs because they bully people into only breeding their dogs. If you don't breed American lines, you're ostracized from the community. And it's a really nasty it's a really nasty situation, unfortunately.
It kind of blows my mind how, uh, being that you have a community of people who are breeding the same dogs, you would think that they would want the best for the breed and kind of come together. But I guess in reality, that's if we lived in the perfect world. But yeah, you touch base on the aggression issues between the Euro bred and the American bred dogs. But how critical is training within the breed?
Sure. I mean, training is necessary no matter what. I mean, a Corso is not an easy dog. It doesn't matter where it comes from. The breed is not easy. They're not for everybody. So I do want to be clear on that. But what I will tell you is that there's no amount of training that will prevent those dogs, those American dogs, from acting like that. It's not a training thing. It's not how you raise them. It's genetic. Now, what I will tell you is that you can learn to live with those dogs with good training. So, ensuring that the dog is fed maybe in a separate room, because a lot of those dogs have food aggression, and that's oftentimes where people get bit. An American or a European bred dog can have food aggression, but you can work it out of them. You can address that situation. The American stock, it doesn't work. You might think you got it. You might think you made a point whenever they're younger, and then they get older and it comes back up, and it's a very different kind of thing. So you can learn to live with those dogs, no differently than, you can learn to live with, like, for example, Malinois are not a breed for everybody. They're very well known for biting their owners. Handler aggression is something that is pretty synonymous with a lot of those working shepherd types. So some German shepherds, Malinois, even some Dutchies can have those kinds of things. So I would say that it is along those same lines. The only difference I would say is that I've never heard of any other breed having the touch sensitivity that the American lines can have. So when you go to touch them around the rear, they don't like it, and they will snap at you. And so, yeah.
So, for somebody like yourself that lives with these dogs and works with them day in and day out, would you say a Corso would be suitable for someone that maybe it was their first dog, or
Never. No,
never?
no. Not even their first dog, like not even their first, like it needs to, not even their first big dog. I mean, I've had dogs my whole life, and I still struggled with my first Corso.
And that
But
was
I
my
did
next.
get a tough.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and even for people who may be really experienced with working breeds, do they really know what they're getting into when they get a Corso?
So I got very, I don't know if you want to call it lucky or unlucky, but my very first Corso was a very tough dog, and it's like basically the toughest that Corso can get. That's how he was. Now, what I'll tell you is that he wasn't like, luckily he didn't have, some can have more of a guardian drive than him. He's a very good guardian, but he never went overboard with it. He was had a really good head on his shoulders, and I have had some that are more that are a little bit more difficult in that regard. But in the areas that he was extremely difficult was that, and this is with most Corso, is that most Corso, particularly the males, don't really have a willingness to please initially. And so a lot of people are not really understanding of that. And so a Corso will, and obviously there's going to be a variance, right? But we're talking like the worst case scenario, is a dog that, is gonna basically fight you on everything. And I don't mean physically fight you. I mean, like, you tell him to sit and he looks at you like he doesn't know what you're saying, even though he knows exactly what you're telling him to do. And and they will make you mean it. They always make you work for it. And they don't like being told what to do. They kind of resent it. They want to be your friend, not your dog. And they're very intelligent, and they're so intelligent. They watch you and they learn, and so they will manipulate you. And if you have any softness in you at all, they'll exploit it. And so you really have to be very tough. Now, me, after I got my first one, when I got him, he really taught me that you give the dog what it needs. You need to never have an expectation of what you are expecting out of a Corso puppy. So you don't get a Corso puppy because you want a cute, cuddly, and you want to have all that. No, because there's a good guarantee that you're not going to get to do that. And so they can very well, from 9 weeks old, I remember I had one buyer contact me and they didn't know what to do, but they had the puppy on the bed with them. It was a husband and wife. The wife got up to go do something. The puppy got up and laid in her spot. And then whenever she went to come back and sit back down and she went to move him, he growled at her. Now, that's not an uncommon thing for a male Corso to do. And a lot of people would be very put off by that, and be intimidated by that. But if you really look at a dog for what it is, there's only a couple ways a dog can communicate with you, and that's with its teeth and with its voice. So, and a lot of people back down to that growl. And what you have to learn to do is not back. You can't take it seriously, and you can't back down to it. And so as long as you don't, and you're tough, then you can have them. And so me, I kind of treat them like I think it's kind of funny at this point, and like I get onto them, but I don't personalize it. I don't think to myself, oh my God, it's aggressive breed, it's aggressive dog, blah blah blah. Like, I don't do any of that. I just see it as this is a tough little puppy who really thinks he's about to try to tell me what to do. Ha ha, funny, but not going to happen, And so I set firm, consistent boundaries and limitations with my dogs. I don't waver. If I tell you to do something, you will do it. And even if you don't, like when Preacher, my first dog, I would tell him to sit, and he knew to sit, and he would kind of ignore me. And then whenever he would do this, he would do that. And so what I did with him is every time he didn't sit, on the first time I told him, he'd have to sit 2 times in a row. And so I tell people, you make the wrong thing hard and the right thing easy. And so I, just worked with a lot of, training with him and kind of getting that out of him and teaching him that he needed to respect me and listen. But they are not for anybody that is just wanting to bring a dog in as a pet and just wanting to like love on. At least not a male. Females are actually a lot easier. And I often recommend females to people, particularly people that have children. But, the males can be great, and some of them are easier, but I never know when a puppy's born, even at 8 weeks, what that puppy's going to do. And puppies can even be different based upon your personality. So that puppy may not be dominant with me, but he may sense weakness in you and not listen for you. And so they will respond to your behavior. And so, they are not, they're not a starter breed, but like many things that require more work, I really love them. And I find that, yes, they take more work, but in my opinion, you get more out of them. And I would be bored with an easier breed personally.
Exactly. So is there a particular age to where, or maybe where they hit that stubborn streak or the asshole stage, pardon my language, but just,
Yeah.
or is there a particular age?
If you've been watching,
Where they hit that?
About 6 months old. Depending upon the dog, some of them are a little bit later matures, but typically 6 months old, it's like when a toddler learns the word no. And they're just like, and where it really comes into play is if you have property and you let them off, like maybe you've gotten used to letting them out to go to the bathroom and you call them back in. And they'll have a moment where they're out there and they're like, you know what? You can't catch me. And I don't actually have to come in. And that's when it hits. And so if you are prepared for that and you manage that from the moment it begins, it's much easier than trying to correct it once it's already been a problem. But like I said, for me, I find that if you expect it and you're ready for it and you do not take it personal, that's the one thing people do is they have this bond with their dog and they love their dog and they see it as this personal insult that the dog doesn't listen and doesn't come in. And they don't realize that the dog is just testing boundaries. He's just seeing what he can get away with. And so the quicker they learn that there's only one way and that's your way, the faster they're going to be an awesome dog for you.
Do you feel like people may put, and when I say this, some folks may take it wrong, and I don't mean it that way, but do you think people put too much human emotion into that dog being their baby versus letting it be what it is and it's a dog? Do you think there's like a correlation of people messing up with?
It's beyond that. It's even worse than that. There are people now that are trying to diagnose their dogs with I don't know what it is about our culture right now that has this obsession with mental disease and like issues, and they're trying to do it to their dogs too. And so I've seen, I saw this one TikTok video of this girl with a Malinois, and it's got this sad music, and she's got the dog on the leash, and she's showing the dog, being a Malinois, and she's like, I would love to be able to let him off leash, but I can't because he's a reactive dog. And this is the reality of living with a reactive dog. And it's like, no, you have a Malinois. This is the reality of having a Malinois.
Right.
They're taking a breed trait. That would be, okay, it would be like if you had like a sight hound that are known for like taking off if they see a rabbit or something and being like, here's my greyhound, and this is a reality of having a greyhound because my greyhound is impulsive and lacks restraint, and they're just like, they're making it into something it's not. The breed was designed to be that way. They were bred to be that way. It's not a mistake. It's not a problem that a Malinois is reactive. They're supposed to be reactive. And so I had somebody who was bought a dog for me, a Corso, and she's taking the dog, and worst mistake she's doing is that she's got this, this is like the classic fake trainer that is becoming a thing, and they always have the do not touch harness on their dog. And then they have all the different, collars because they don't know how to use just one. So they'll have an e-collar, a choke collar, a prong collar, a harness, of all this stuff. And, she makes all these posts about how the dog is aloof, like not even aloof. She'll just say she doesn't like strangers and she's scared and she's blah, 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 and this and that, and trying to make it look like the dog has a personality issue. But the reality of the situation is that in our breed, the Corso, the correct temperament is described as being aloof, right? They're not supposed to be friendly. They can be, but it typically does not come naturally to them. It has to be worked. You have to socialize them. And so that means that you have to let people touch them, right? If your dog is a guardian breed, which Corso are, they kind of turn on at around 4 months old. They start to realize that the world is potentially a threatening place, and they don't know what's threatening about it. They just wake up one day and realize that, the world is potentially scary because we've bred them to do that. And so you have to show them, everything that is a threat and that is not a threat. And so they're likely to be afraid of all kinds of things, like maybe a fire hydrant, something they haven't seen before. And so you have to walk them up to it, and you have to show them what it is, and you have to be patient, wait for them to calm down. If it's with people, you have to introduce them to people. If you want them to be social, then that's something you have to do. Some of them, it comes easier to than others because they were never designed to be a social dog. They lived in rural farms in Italy with their families. They were never bred to be a dog that is accepting of lots of different strangers and in situations like that. But like I said, some of them can, and with good work. But when she gets on there and talks about the dog as though the dog has something wrong with it, as though the dog has a personality issue, when that's exactly the breed she bought. That's a problem. And there's a lot of people out there that don't know any better than that. They just see her post and they think, oh, here's this Corso, and they see her post and they think to themselves, oh, well, this must be wrong. This dog must not supposed to be like this. Not realizing that that dog is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And she's doing nothing to fix it because of the fact that she will not allow that dog to interact with humans, with strangers. And so she takes the dog out, takes it to Home Depot, does all this stuff with it, but will not let it interact with people. And so, you know, be like anything. If you had a fear of dogs and your mother was always like, don't you worry, you'll never have to be around a dog, and they scooped you away and always kept you away from dogs, pretty soon, not only would you have a fear of dogs, but that fear would grow because you feel justified in that fear because people are kind of affirming that fear, right? By keeping you away, by never, because think about it, most of the time, if you're not supposed to be afraid of something, if they want you to be okay with something, then they will introduce you to that and acclimate you to that situation. So by her not doing that, she's making it worse. And in turn, providing a bunch of misinformation out there to the world about these dogs. And in my opinion, for a very selfish reason, which is she wants attention on social media, and which is a really big problem right now with pet owners, is they all want to be popular because they're dogs. And what they're finding is that dogs with a sob story get more attention. And so when they go out and they say, woe is me, my poor dog, look at what my poor dog is doing, and look at how noble I am because I'm here and I'm taking care of this dog and I'm not giving up, and look at what I'm doing, when in reality, the dog is doing exactly what it was bred to do, exactly what its genetics would dictate that it does. It's just that the owner is sometimes manipulating, sometimes just doesn't know any better. They just bought the dog and they did zero research. But overall, it is still very damaging.
Exactly. As far as the Corso breed in general, does the breed have a lot of genetic disease? And I know you're an advocate for general health, genetic health testing and all that, but as far as genetics wise, is there a lot of disease within the breed?
No, like I said, they're still very healthy. There has been rumored to be epilepsy within our breed. What I will tell you is that we've had studies done that did not find a genetic link to epilepsy, and these are the same researchers that have found epilepsy in other breeds, and so they've not been able to put a genetic link to it yet. So, and what I can tell you is that I have not seen it behave that way. And unfortunately, epilepsy is an extremely complex disorder, or really it's a set of symptoms, and it can have many causes. And there's not ever, because it's so expensive, nobody's doing any of the testing to exclude other reasons for the epilepsy. So it very well could be that we don't have an epilepsy problem. But what I will say is that I don't know yet. I know that there are people that have produced it, but it doesn't, from what I've seen so far, it really doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason thus far. Aside from that, any large breed dog is going to be susceptible to hip dysplasia. Even in the most documented and controlled studies regarding hip dysplasia, with the entire premise being excluding any dog that doesn't have great hips, they've never been able to fully remove or eliminate the possibility of producing hip dysplasia in large breed dogs. So even a really great breeder doing everything they can is still likely, in fact, highly likely in the lifetime of being a breeder, to produce some of that. Now, where it becomes a problem is the numbers that you're producing. So in any given genetic anomaly. Anyone can produce anything. The question is, are you producing more than the average, more than the known average? That's when it becomes a problem. So I have not seen massive amounts of hip dysplasia. I have not seen massive amounts of heart failure. I've not seen massive amounts of cancer. Do we have the every now and then dog that does have it? Yes. And more often than not, what I will say is when it looks like for example, there was a breeder who this is when you really start getting into this stuff, it all of a sudden becomes very clear why we have problems. So this woman was like, there's a dog, Westminster Winter, really popular dog, really nice dog. And she bred some lines off this dog and produced a litter of puppies, and all of the puppies except for one of them was dead before a year old of heart failure. And I think even the last dog, I think there was one that was holding on, and she was even going to breed that dog, and I think that one also came down with it. And so she went and she trashed her mentor, which was the breeder of that Westminster dog, and was trying to basically put him on blast. But when you look at the pedigree, the dogs were extremely, extremely inbred, extremely inbred. And it was, I just laughed because I was just kind of like, what did you expect? You cannot do breedings like that. You couldn't breed anything like that. Maybe fish or chickens or something that have a higher tolerance for inbreeding, but you cannot do that level of breeding with dogs. And so for me, that discounted, the breeding itself discounted anything that woman had to say, because it doesn't matter. When you do a breeding like that, you've officially removed any other part of that equation from being relevant, because you've jeopardized the entire exercise with the level of inbreeding. I had another guy call me not too long ago. His dog was seizing, and he's epilepsy, and he's wanting to know the lines. And he's like, yeah, I talked to this other breeder friend of mine, and he was looking through the lines, and he said it's this dog. And it's a huge problem with why people think epilepsy is in our breed, because they don't really know much. Most of them, I hate to say it, but a lot of them don't. They want to breed dogs, but they don't actually care about any of the intricacies about breeding dogs. And so I told him, send me your pedigree. The first thing that I saw was his dog was, once again, extremely, extremely inbred. And in fact, even in the lines that looked like they weren't related, they in fact were related down on the 5th generation. They just had different names because different breeders bought from the same breeding and put their own names on it. So there was not one single clear line, not one single free line on that 4-generational pedigree that was not related. And I told him, I said, look, anybody that's looking at this and telling you that it's any certain dog in the pedigree is an idiot, because the only thing that matters about your pedigree is that your dog is extremely inbred. And that negates any possibility of anything else being wrong, because it just does. It's too polluted to be able to make any kind of other judgment. And no one else looked. And the breeder himself didn't even look. He was breeding dogs, and he didn't even look at his own pedigrees before breeding the dogs. And with the Corso, right, that was almost extinct 40 years ago, most of our dogs come off of the same dogs. So there's not a lot of genetic diversity anyway. So you should not be doing these heavy line breedings or inbreedings off of Corso, because there's not as much genetic diversity as there is in other breeds where people will do that kind of thing. So I think that when bred properly, they're still a very healthy breed.
That's really interesting. Well, I didn't know that the gene pool was small in the Corso, but I was going to say that at some point you do need an outcross on the wood pile so you don't have those issues. My next question was, do you study pedigrees, and what kind of value and information and do you get from pedigrees? I'm a pedigree snob and junkie myself, and I just feel like you can learn a lot of valuable information from a pedigree, and it tells a story. What are your thoughts on that?
So I love researching pedigrees, but what I will tell you is that I think that it can be a trap. So pedigrees are important, but they're only as important as the people who were putting those dogs together. And so when you have a goal in mind for whether that be structure or temperament, you can take like two people can be breeding the same lines, and that's actually a very common thing in Corso because, like I said, they all started off of there was only two real foundation kennels in Italy very early on. That was Cerberus and Deldirium. And so there's a lot of dogs, almost all of our dogs go back to the same dogs. And I've actually done some videos on this where I will go on the pedigree database and I'll show people, we'll go back to the 10 generation pedigree and I'll show them how it all goes back to the same stuff. And so you'll have people, and this is where skill comes in, because a lot of people think that breeding is just as simple as putting two dogs together. But the reality is that, like many things, you have to have skills in doing it. And with breeding, it does require skill. One is knowing your pedigrees and knowing how to use them, but a dog is only as good as the person who is putting those dogs together. So let's say, for example, that you have one breeder and they're working with Dirium, but you have this other breeder and they're working with Dirium, but one of them is educated on structure and temperament and the other one is not. And so even though they're genetically the same, physically they can look completely different because of the selection process, and that can be ruined very quickly, and fixed very quickly. Like, for example, Dirium, Vito and Deviri, he was breeding for a very long time and then he got out of it for a while. And originally he had sold his dogs when he got out of it to, I believe, his niece, which was Deglielmi. Well, eventually he decided to get back into it. And he was able to pick up the pieces of his lines and go back to breeding on the same level of quality in a very short amount of time, where there have been people breeding for this whole time that cannot even get the quality that he produces on his worst day. And so they're really, and there's a lot of that I find is that people in this breed, in my breed particularly, worse enough with the American stuff, actually the American lines, they really focus on these lines and they're like, oh well, it's this and it's that, but they have no concept or knowledge of the dog in front of them, and they think that the pedigree makes up for the lack of quality in the dog that is standing with that pedigree. So what I will say is that, can a pedigree help you? Yes, it can let you know what's in there. If you really know what you're doing, like, for example, one of the things I like to do is there was a guy in Texas that had a dog that I really liked his head. And in our breed, the head is kind of hard to get. And because it was almost extinct, the breed, there went through a period where the structure was really bad. And so they had to choose structure over type. So the type is kind of all over the place. And there are certain lines that are known for producing heads. Those people really focused on the head, but they didn't really focus on the body. And so it's kind of like these puzzle pieces. You're having to kind of put these pieces together. And one of the things that I was looking at was this one breeder. He was producing really good heads, but the bodies were horrible, particularly the rears. They were just so bad I would not touch them. But what I did is I went through the pedigree and I found this dog, which was a Deglielmi dog, that was behind every single one of these dogs that had these beautiful heads. So I was able to pinpoint where they were getting their heads from. So I went to a different breeder who was using those same lines, and I was basically able to build a breeding with recognizing what was in my fourth generation to kind of capitalize on that head. So it can help you, but I don't believe that just because a dog is of a certain line that makes it valuable. The dog needs to be it still needs to be a breed quality dog. No matter what the pedigree is, it needs to be a breed quality dog. And I will be the first one to tell you that I will take a dog out of unknown lines, not unknown, but known, but like not necessarily people who are like, oh, these lines are great, but the dog is really nice. That for me, the dog in front of me matters first, pedigree second. And
That
so
makes,
that would go ahead.
I was going to say that makes perfect sense. Uh, as a breeder in your program, what do you consider to be your strengths and weaknesses? If I guess if you breed dogs long enough, everybody, you probably evaluate that at some point. What do you feel like your strengths and weaknesses are in your breeding program?
I would say that the biggest downfall that I find in a lot of breeders is that um, in my breed, a lot of the people that are breeding are not breeding dogs because they are interested in the dogs. They're doing it because they're older, middle-aged people without a friend group, and it's nice to have a little bit of money on the side, but a lot of these people already have money, and mostly it's a social thing for them. So they like to get on Facebook, they like to talk to each other, they like to, breed with each other's dogs, which is why, unfortunately, a lot of the top breeders in America are not actually breeding very good dogs. And it's because they are very much about stroking each other's egos by only breeding with each other's dogs, and very much like we were talking about pedigree. So, for example, to me, I don't care if a dog is a Westminster winner. I'm not going to put a female to that male just because that's what he did. I need to know that that male is going to complement my female. And so if they don't complement each other, it doesn't matter what his accomplishments are because they don't complement each other. And so that's something that they don't ever look at because they don't actually know about structure. And so what I think for me is different is that I'm highly competitive, although I think most of us are, but I um I enjoy reading, I enjoy research, I enjoy learning, and I want to be producing the best. And I don't and I know like I would never be happy producing subpar dogs just because that dog comes off of a Westminster winner, because I know what that is. And so what I'll tell you is the vast majority of breeders are in it for the wrong reasons. A lot of people think they're in it for the money, but that's actually not true. Very few breeders are in it for the money. Those are your backyard breeders. They tend to stay. They're not you're not going to hear from them. They're staying in the shadows. They know what they're up to isn't wrong. But the big breeders that you see active on social media and stuff like that, they have money. What it really is for them, a lot of them is a power trip. So they want to be, if you think about it in the same way that there's like politics, right? And there's, in the breeding community, it's very much like that. So it's a power play. They have groups of people that follow them, that like them. They will often vie for positions on the breed board. So, like our breed club, I cannot tell you the drama that's gone down with presidents, past presidents, and corruption getting removed. They, it is ridiculous. It's very much like regular politics, and that's I mean that's if you really recognize that that's what human beings do, that we are also social creatures and we're going to form hierarchies, that's what it is. And so it it very often isn't about the dogs. It isn't about producing the best dog. It's about being on top of the breed, getting the notoriety, getting the attention, having the control. And that's why like for example, when I put Nirvana out, right? Nirvana is my best accomplishment so far. So to put this into perspective, the people that I am competing against in my breed, most of them have been breeding for at least 20 years. At least 20 years. That's the same old people are still in it. Okay. And and of those, maybe some of them 15 years, but 20 years and more. Some of them would even say 30 years. And so I was able to take a puppy, right? Nirvana was 10 months old, and put her out in the ring. And within, I don't know, a couple months, she was a grand champion. And in at I guess so within what 10, 11, yeah, definitely, yeah, within 2 months she was a grand champion. She showed up at nationals. She beat a previous Westminster winner, um I want to say, don't quote me on this, but I want to say there was at least 20 dogs. I think there were more, but just being conservative, I want to say there was at least 20 adult dogs that she beat out at AKC Nationals at only a year old, a female at only a year old. That is, she didn't take first. She took second at Nationals. I will say she did take first for puppy Nationals, but the reality of the situation is there's no reason that a puppy, a female puppy, should have been able to have gone out and beat them like that. The only reason she was able to do it is because they have become so lazy and relaxed in producing subpar dogs, because there hasn't really been much competition. Because what they do when you get into the breed is, which is what happened to me, is they try to pressure you into who to buy dogs from. And it's all who they bought dogs from. And it's very much like, oh, well, if you're going to do this, you have to do it our way. You have to do it right. And you have to buy from these people. And these people have all these rules. And you have to jump through all their hoops. And you have to do all their stuff. And that's the only way to do it. And if you try to do it your own way, well, then you're an arrogant know-it-all. And you're blah, blah, blah. And, forget about trying to buy European dogs, because in American world, all those dogs are sick, boxer mixes, which isn't true. And so what happens is that it creates this atmosphere where all of the people that are getting into it are catering or are basically being beaten into submission by this group, by this community, to all have the same stuff. And that's what's horrible about it, is if you really look at their pedigrees, almost all of them are breeding the same stuff, especially once you go back 5-6 generations in their pedigrees. And so that's why they're all producing the same stuff. They're very subpar dogs. So if you know what you're doing, if you educate yourself, you can go out there and you can clean house with a good dog, which is what I did with Nirvana, and I will continue to do, and with my other dogs. And so that it's not so easy in other breeds. They're like, for example, Dobermans, you can't do that with Dobermans. German short hair pointers, you can't do it with those, because there's enough good breeders in those communities that understand structure, that it's very hard competition. You cannot go out there with subpar dogs and win. With the Corso, you still can, but hopefully we'll be changing that soon. And so I guess what I would say, what makes me different and why I love what I do, is that I don't half-ass it, pardon my French, but if I treat it like the profession that it is, right? So everything requires skill. If you want to be a good plumber, you need to do your research. You need to have good tools. You need to know what you're doing. And there's too many people out there who don't know anything about dogs. They couldn't tell you what a croup is from a pastern. And they don't know anything about good structure. They don't know anything about roach top lines. They don't know anything about genetics. They don't know anything about what the standard should look like, or even what a true Corso should look like. But they're out there breeding anyway. And, and so they're out there just not producing good dogs. But if you do your research, if you do the work, if you learn how to read structure and all that stuff, and how to breed good dogs, then you will very quickly be able to breed these wonderful, fantastic dogs that you can be proud of, and that will go out and do very big things. It's still difficult. It's still a job, not every dog is perfect. And I got a female out here I just bred that is like fantastic in the body, and her head is atrocious, which is a very common thing. And I'm just going to have to keep trying at it. I'm going to just have to keep cracking at it, and put her at a male with a really nice head, and hope that I can, kind of fix that going forward.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you about Nirvana and I knew she was a grand champion. I knew she went to Westminster, but I was just going to ask you about how that, you touch base on it on pretty much everything, but just how that experience was, being able to go to that level and basically do what you did, kind of kicked ass and took names.
So I'll tell you this, I had been ridiculed publicly by a lot of breeders in America because of my YouTube channel. And also because I do have a tendency to come off as a know-it-all, because I'm I love to research. And so when I say something, I say it with a lot more emphasis and I guess arrogance, I guess is what they would call it. But I'm very firm in what I believe because I've researched it. Like if I say something, unless I tell you, don't quote me on that, and I'm not 100% sure, I'm 99.9% right. And I will say that because I hate being wrong. And so I'm very careful about what I say. You know what I mean? And so that's why I can say that. I have no problem admitting that I don't know something. There's a lot of strength in that. And so growing up, I was kind of like that, a bit of a know-it-all. And my family kind of beat that out of me, not physically, but you know what I mean? And I got to the point where I never really wanted to be wrong. And so I always try to research something very heavily. And if I don't know 100%, I'll say that. But despite that, I had a lot of very well-known breeders that would put me on blast on Facebook, and they called me a nobody, and that I was a know-it-all, and that I was just this YouTube person, blah blah blah, and I hadn't been in it long. That's their number one thing, is they love to shove it in their face how much longer they've been doing it than you, as though you can't be doing the wrong thing for 20 years, you know. Just because you've been doing the wrong thing for 20 years don't make it right. And so whenever Nirvana would go out there and she was beating these big name people. Okay, you Google Connie Corso, the list of people on that page, she was beating them. And these are people that hated me, like publicly hated me. And so every time she would beat them, I was just like, it wasn't even about how nice my dog was. I was just like, that's what you get. Like, you know what I mean? It was very much like it was a thing for me, you know, it was a moment for me. And she just did that, and they couldn't be mad, because the reality of the situation is that a good dog is mathematical. It's factual. It cannot be argued with. The measurements are either there or they're not. It is not open to suggestion or to interpretation. A dog either has a front or it doesn't. It has a rear or it doesn't. It has a top line or it doesn't. And so, you know, that's one of the things I really like about it, is that it's not open to interpretation. Now, there is a certain amount of politics, and I will say that I do believe that that politics were very much at play there. But overall, over the broad scheme of things, I mean, Nirvana was so influential that people would call my handler and ask her if Nirvana was going to be at shows, because they didn't want to show up, because it was a waste of time, because they knew that they would get beat by her. And I did that by learning about structure. I didn't do it by kissing someone's butt. I didn't do it by buying really expensive sperm off of a Westminster winner. I didn't do anything other than, in fact, if you were to look at what I started with, and I will say this is how you can tell a good breeder. A good breeder will take subpar dogs, and you will literally see generation after generation of improvement. You can see it in the dogs. If somebody is either keeping with the same thing, they're not producing better, or they're producing worse, then they don't have the skill. And just because you can put two dogs together, and just because you can sell a dog, does not mean that you have the skill to breed good dogs. And so I have that. I enjoy it. I love it. I researched it. It's a challenge to me. I find it to be, I'm glad that it, you know, on like some moments I'm kind of like, whenever you don't produce that perfect dog that you're wanting to produce, because, you know, who doesn't want to produce that? But on the flip side, I also don't want to, I recognize that it's a process, and I don't necessarily want to peak too quickly, because then where do you go from there? But what I can tell you is that if you go at it and you actually learn, you do your research, you learn basic dog anatomy, and you learn your dog's standard, and you learn how to identify all of those physical traits that are necessary, you can produce better dogs. And it's just shocking to me how these other people, they're not doing that. And so Nirvana just is a fantastic dog, but she's a very like early representation. Like I've already outproduced Nirvana. Like her daughter Ibiza is a very nice dog. Now I'm waiting to take my dogs out now because I'm realizing that the front is the last thing to mature, particularly the forechest. And so if you really have good fronts and you want to show that, which in my breed, good front assembly is actually kind of rare. So if I really want a dog to, show exactly how much better it is, it's better to give that dog some time to mature. And so that's why I'm kind of taking it a little bit slower with showing right now. But yeah, I mean, it is not rocket science, but I will say that you do have to have a skill for it, like anything in life. It's not something that is without skill, and it's not as easy as just buying. Like so many people think, well, because I've talked to people who want to breed, and I'm like, I have a class that I teach, and I charge people $1,000 to be able to take this class from me. And and people will say, well, I don't know that I need that. I mean, if I just buy nice dogs from you, and it's like, yeah, you can buy a nice dog from me. You can buy 2 nice dogs from me. But guess what? When those puppies are born, not every single puppy is going to be that nice. And if you don't know what you're doing, even if you bought the most expensive, the most awesome dogs you could buy, you will ruin that line because you will not know how to select. You won't know what puppy to keep back. You will literally keep back the wrong dog because you don't know what you're looking at. And so you'll very quickly ruin, which is, I've told people, it's a waste of money. If you're not going to do the research and learn, don't buy a dog from me if you want to breed, because you're wasting your money, because you're just going to ruin it anyway. You might as well go buy a dog from somebody else a lot cheaper, because you know what I mean? You won't be ruining that.
Well, they're ruining what you've built. So I completely
Yeah.
get it. As somebody who has a really successful social media platform, like YouTube, I think the last time I looked on your Senza Tempo kind of Corso, you were at 185K. How do you balance, and how do you deal with the positives and negatives of having those platforms?
So what I will say is that you have to have a very interesting balance of caring and not caring. You have to know what you're doing so that you're not open to, and you have to have good goals. So like, for example, it's always been very difficult for me because what it takes to be a good breeder is often contrary to what the public believes is a good breeder. So for example, when I retire a female and then I sell that female, I've had people that are like, oh, you don't care about them, you don't love them, you just breed them and then you just get rid of them. And the reality of the situation is that if I want to have a line, right, I'm not trying to be a hobby breeder. I'm not just breeding dogs to breed puppies. If you want to have a line, you have to have a certain amount of dogs on your property available to you, because you're going to need to be able to do genetic diversity. You're going to need to be able to bring a dog back and loop it back in again. And so you need space. And if you keep every single dog that doesn't work out or that you retire, you become a hoarder. And that's not fair. And not only that, but it's not fair to the dog, because like me, I breed my females on the second heat. We breed back to back because that is scientifically what is best for the dogs based upon their reproductive cycle. And then we retire them early. So I have yet to breed a dog past, I think I may breed Velocity one more time. She's 4 years old right now. She would be the first dog that I had ever bred at like 5, because she'll be 5 in February. But even then, that would be her last breeding. Every other female has been retired around between 3 and 4, depending upon their cycling and litters that they produce for me. And that means that I'm able to take a dog and have them contribute to the breed, while also then getting to go and be a pet, be a valued pet in someone's home, where they get that one-on-one attention that they cannot get in a kennel environment. And they're still young enough that the owner of this dog feels that they're still getting a good deal. So it's, I believe that it is the best way to do it. But social media, I got a lot of pushback from that. And in fact, it took a long time for people to be okay with the fact that I oftentimes have to rehome dogs for various reasons. Sometimes the health testing doesn't work out. Sometimes I don't like the temperament of the dog, which has happened whenever I bought a lot of like American stock before I really learned about that stuff. So, there are differences, or like, for example, maybe you have a dog that has a hard labor, and then everyone's like, or I would live stream my labors, and maybe I don't take the dog to the vet as fast as somebody wants me to. And so then you get chastised for that. When the reality is that the dog was fine and the dog needed to go through a natural labor process. So the internet has its own opinions, and a lot of that is based upon animal rights activists, which is a lot of misinformation. And so I've worked very hard to educate people on the reality of dog breeding, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that has worked out well for me. And then sometimes it has not. And I will tell you that the odds are that I would have a much larger social media if I never touched on those negative things, if I hid it and I didn't address it. But the reason I don't is because I got really sick and tired of people acting like breeders are these lazy people who just make money off their dogs. And I used to get that I used to get this hate mail all the time. People wishing me dead, lots of death threats. And also why don't you that's another thing they love. Why don't you get a real job, making money off the backs of your dogs? And so anyway, I had to learn to show people enough, but also like, I don't show everything. You know what I mean? Like, for example, like, I think I would now, but I was a little bit more scared before. But like, I had a dog that had produced a cleft lip at one point, and I was like, oh my God, I can never show anybody this because everyone's going to freak out. And the reality is that people probably would have, not realizing that cleft lips are actually very closely associated with folic acid. And most lines or people may think a dog has that is throwing that. There's actually scientific evidence to support the fact that a lack of folic acid can cause that. And the dog never produced it again. But it wasn't something that I told anyone about because I was very scared that I'm wearing a litter of puppies in for ear crops, been doing it forever, and my puppies caught parvo. And I was terrified to mention the word parvo. I mentioned that my puppies had a virus and they were dying, but I did not mention parvo because I was scared to. And so there is a lot of pressure to present the facade that everything's great and everything's perfect and everything's whatever, when you're breeding animals, it's never that. And there's always going to be pitfalls, but ultimately I do think that I have achieved my main goal, which is in showing people that breeding dogs is a respectable job that, when done right, produces good, predictable results. But that people need to be proactive in choosing good breeders. No differently than you would not hire somebody who does not know what they're doing to replace your roof. You should not be purchasing dogs from people that are just willy-nilly, and it's something that our culture still has not quite learned yet. They still, there's a lot of people that buy from backyard breeders and puppy mills and stuff like that, and it's a part of our culture. And until that stops, then we'll never deal with overpopulation. We'll never deal with backyard breeders. We'll never end up dealing with the puppy mill people, because as long as people impulsively buy dogs, it'll always be a problem. Definitely. And so I've tried to fix that with my channel, tried to show people that there's more that goes into it, but I don't know to what extent of a change that I've made.
That's very interesting. I've always wondered how you kind of balance that, because I don't know that I would have the temperament to put up with what you have from what I've seen and just comments and stuff, you know. Uh, something that I've always kind of laughed at when I've watched your channel is like Preacher and I think Cashmere back in the day that, you know, like if you had a younger Corso out there acting a fool, like they would step up and get them in line. I always wondered, was that something that you taught them, or is that something that just comes natural?
So, I think it was I think it was environmental. So, um, I spoke about Corsos being like they watch you and they learn. And so, um, a lot of people, you know, there's a big rift in the community where they talk about like working dogs and proven working ability and blah blah blah. But for me, a working dog to me is a dog that finds a way to work for you. And so Preacher is one of those dogs. And so he would notice, and he's not the only one. Velocity will do it. Blondie will do it. Nirvana will do it. I haven't caught them all on video, but they will. And so what happens is, like, let's say, for example, that I'm trying to catch a dog or I'm trying to grab a dog or whatever, and that dog's running from me. And Preacher will see me going after that dog, and being a good dog, being a well-trained dog, and respecting me, he puts himself to work. And so he will figure out a way to to assist me. And it doesn't, like, if I'm digging a hole, they're the kind of dogs that'll run up and like, oh, we're digging, okay, and they'll just start digging with you, you know. So they will find a way to integrate themselves into whatever it is that you're doing, and be of assistance to you. And so for me, and then what we do is, as a trainer, it's called capturing, but you're capturing a natural behavior. So when Preacher would do that, I would acknowledge that he's doing that behavior. I would praise him for doing that behavior, and I would associate that behavior with a word, right? So go, you know, I think mine is like, go get that dog, you know, skit that dog, right? Go, or watch him, go watch that dog. And so he knows what, you know, he's doing that behavior. I've now said that thing, I've affirmed it. And because he wants to work with me, it's a communication that happens between us. And he's like, okay, got it. Now I know. And then whenever I tell him to do it, then he goes and he does that. So, and that comes from me having a pack of dogs. I prefer to have a pack situation with my dogs. It's something that I do not recommend to average people. It is a different part of my personality that has nothing to do with dog breeding. It is very much a different side of it, which is really dog psychology. And you need to have a very thorough understanding and respect for dogs being pack animals, and having a social hierarchy, and respecting that hierarchy, as well as respecting the nature of dogs and understanding their body language. Because, for example, I will not send Preacher to go correct anyone. The dog has to be willing to take the correction. So like, for example, if let's say Batista was outside running around and maybe I'm trying to get him or whatever. Like, at this age now, I would never send Preacher after Batista, because I know that Batista is not going to back down. And in fact, it would be a fight, guaranteed. So you have to know your dogs. You have to know you have to know all. That's a very intricate thing. But having said that, knowing that will enable you to be able to do things like that with your dogs. And there's one other guy that is like that. His name, Beckman's dog training. I forget his first name, but it's Beckman's dog training. He has a Doberman, and he uses his Doberman the same way that I use Preacher. He can send him, and that dog will give corrections, and he'll help with training and stuff like that. So, but that's a very different. It's a completely separate side of what I do, than to the breeding, and I do believe that it is a breed trait in that they want to assist you. Like, if Preacher was on a farm, and you were working cattle, that behavior would be very valuable, because you're herding the cattle and you see that other cow and you tell him, Preacher, go get that cow. He's going to go get it, right? So that's where that comes from, I'm quite sure. So the tendency towards that behavior, I did not train into them, but recognizing it, capturing it, and putting it to use is training.
That's really cool. Uh, if if an individual was thinking about becoming a breeder, a Corso breeder, short-haired breeder, Malinois breeder, what would be the best piece of advice you feel like you could give them?
So for me, I would say first and foremost, you start with the species. So with dog, right? You learn dog anatomy first. You learn what a croup is. You learn what rear angulation is, what turn to stifle is, what upper arm is, forechest, shoulder lay. You learn about all that stuff first. And then you start looking into your breed, and you have to look into every side of that. So a lot of people don't know this, but like, when you're looking at a breed, you want to Google working lines, you want to Google show lines. And because you really want to get down to everything about your breed, and then you want to call and talk with breeders. A good breeder is gonna want to talk to you. They're not gonna talk to you like a lot of people will contact me and they're like, wow, I can't believe that you're just like so willing to talk to me. And he goes, I was trying to talk to other people and they act like I'm bothering them. And that's because they don't really know anything and they don't have any passion for the breed. And so they don't want to talk about it. But a good breeder is going to want to talk your ear off about their breed. And because they're passionate about it and they care about it. So anyway, so you got to find out all the different breeders. I would say, it's good to look up the top people, but having said that, like in my breed, if you were to look up the top people, I mean, I would run as far away as possible. So it's not always a guarantee. And I think even in German Shepherds, if you were to look at the people winning in the show rings, I do not think that they are breeding the best German Shepherds. So there are going to be exceptions to who are the best people. But once you understand dogs in general, right? Because some people will try to convince you otherwise. So like, for example, you would never fall for the lie that a German Shepherd should have a sloped top line and its rear legs 5 feet out behind it as it's moving, because you would know that from an anatomy perspective, that is not helpful to a dog in general. Therefore, it cannot be ethical, right? Same thing with a bulldog. Like if your bulldog's nose is in between the eyes and the eyelashes are farther out than the nose is, then you know that, anatomy wise, that's not going to work. That's not good. And so you won't fall for a lot of the bad breeders because you will see that structurally their dogs are not worth breeding. It doesn't matter what their accomplishments are. The dog will speak for their work. But as long as you understand that, then you can start. And I say, do not be in a rush. That's the worst thing you can do, is be in a rush. You should be willing to take your time and do your research. Lurk around on some of the breed pages and get very familiar with the pedigrees. Start. Most breeds have an online pedigree database that you can research. And so you can start looking in and seeing, what people are working with and things like that. And, the reality is that if you understand basic dog anatomy and then you go and you heavily research the standard, do not go and talk to a breeder yet. They're always going to have their personal preference. The standard is what it is. The dog is supposed to it's supposed to fit a certain criteria, period, end of story. And it's a good idea to kind of look at very lots of different people's lines, because what I'll tell you is some of the best breeders are people that are not loud. They're not very vocal. Like my mentor, who breeds very good dogs, he'll never hear from him. He's not anywhere. He's not wasting his time talking to people or trying to convince people of nothing. He's doing his own thing and he's breeding good dogs and he doesn't have the time for the nonsense. And a lot of good breeders are like that. So it is work, but ultimately, if you can identify good structure, you know what good anatomy is, you know what you're looking for per your breed, you will be able to identify a good dog. You don't need to take the breeder's word for it, because you will know if they have quality or not. And that is the utmost thing I try to stress to people. And I'll have people, and they'll say, well, I want to buy a dog from you because I don't want to get screwed over. And it's like, look, if you take my course, no one will ever be able to screw you over. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take anyone's word for it, because the dog either has it or it doesn't. And while there are no perfect dogs, if you're familiar with your breed and kind of what's being produced, you'll know that, like, for example, you shouldn't necessarily expect a head, a front, a rear, like those are kind of unicorn dogs. And even if somebody produced it, they're not selling it to you. So sometimes you do have to be reasonable. And sometimes, like, for example, Batista's example of that. Batista is not a representation of what his bloodlines are. I got a lot of flack on social media for him, because when people would look at him and they would, post pictures, and they would try to break him down and be like, look how bad his structure is, and he shouldn't be breeding, and blah, 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 blah. But his bloodlines, and I'm talking his father, his mother, his grandmother, like his immediate bloodlines were very good. And a dog will very rarely produce themselves if they've been bred correctly. More often, you're producing the grandparents. And so Batista produces way better than himself, like, and on a predictable, for example, I get people that don't understand it, but I charge a lot for a stud fee. Nobody's even used him. I charge $3,500 as a stud fee for Batista. That's a very high stud fee. Most people charge $2,500 at the very most. He's never been shown. He's, health tested, but he's never been shown, and people don't want to pay that price. But the thing is that I know what he produces. He produces a Westminster type dog. So if you want to use him, I don't care what you think about what I'm charging. I know what he produces, and I know that he produces that no matter what quality he's put to. He's a corrective dog. Not every dog can do that. Very few dogs can be put to mediocre dogs and correct what's wrong with those lines and outproduce it and produce something better. And he will do that. And so I charge a lot. And then a lot of people don't realize that that is a sacrifice that would be necessary, because they can't see structure, so they can't see what he's doing well enough, and they don't understand. And so, like me, I will. If a dog is nice enough, I will. And on the flip side, I had a chance to use a Westminster winner. They wanted over $6,000 as a stud fee. And I was like, no, because I'd seen what he produced, and he does not produce at a $6,000 rate. I don't care if he's a Westminster winner. He's not producing that quality of dog for me to feel that his stud fee was worth that. And so, anyway.
Is Nirvana is a Blondie Batista production, correct?
She's an Achilles production.
Achilles, okay.
Yeah. But I've taken over the years I've bred Batista, and one of the things that I'll tell you is, in every single litter, he always produces this one dog that just has it all, and sometimes he'll even produce multiples, but they always have these fantastic rears, really good top lines. Typically they do have a front too, and it does not matter what you put him to. It doesn't matter how bad it is. He overpowers it. His bloodlines, he has purposeful breeding for many generations ahead of him or behind him, and so he produces with purpose, with predictability. And you put him to something really nice, and then you're going to get something really nice. But on the flip side, they are the kind of lines that will correct. And there are very few that can do that. And if you know what you're looking at, like for me, if someone showed me all the pictures of Batista's offspring and the females he was put to, I would know that he's worth using, because he's going to produce a high quality dog for me. And like, there's a woman who I sold a dog to, and I offered to let her use Batista because I knew what he would produce. She had a female that was a sister to Blondie, and I've used him on Blondie. That's how I got Hefe. And so I offered, and mind you, I would really, at that time, I would have never offered anybody to use Batista because I'm very competitive. And honestly, I didn't want somebody out there really messing with my ability to compete in the ring with a dog that was similar quality. But because I liked this person, I was like, you can use him. They didn't. They used a completely different dog. I'm not sure why. I think it may have been a bit of the social stuff of her not wanting to be associated with me because I had this kind of like anybody that dealt with me, that's what the community does. If they can't control you, they basically they'll bully and separate you from everyone around you so that nobody even wants to use your dogs or anything like that, which really I don't care. But nonetheless, she didn't. And so she produced very subpar. Then she ended up using another stud, same thing, produced very subpar. And if she would have used my dog, she would have produced a way better. And once you do that, once you produce a really nice dog, it's so obvious that nothing else will do. You can't go back from that. You know what I mean? And so for me, I'm sitting here twiddling my thumbs like, why? Like I looked at this litter that she produced recently and I was like, why? Like, why are you doing that? Like, but it's because it's not about breeding the best dog. It's about being liked as a part of a community. That's a big part of breeding that a lot of people don't know gets in the way of it. And so the best breeders that I know of are people that are not necessarily antisocial, but they are mavericks. They are not followers. They are free thinkers. They do not care what the popular opinion is. They're going to do what they believe is right, and they don't care how you feel about it. And a lot of breeders out there are not. They're very much about reputation. They're very much about following. They don't want to work with lines that somebody may not like because they want to be liked and they want to be accepted. And it's a big problem in the breeding world.
That is, well, somebody's always going to have an opinion no matter what you're doing. So to fall in line with trying to make everybody happy and being popular, I would be all about producing the best dog. My final question is, where do you see the Corso breed in years to come? You have your American breeders, you have the Euro breeders. You got people who's trying to do it right. You got backyard breeders. You got people who are just breeding for no reason. I mean, how do you see it in your opinion playing out?
Sure. So, I used to be very pessimistic about it because of the American stock, and it was getting really popular. And I mean, it's always been here, so of course it's popular. But they were being very successful at scaring anybody from buying European. There was this big rumor going around that everything from Europe was sick and that it was a boxer mix. And so people really weren't, like, the amount of people working with European lines was very small. And I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and toot my own horn on this one. I take full responsibility for the fact that I've done a really good job at educating people on the truth about those dogs. I got chastised and attacked for years over accusing those people of having mixed breed dogs. And when the proof finally came out, they now admit that they have stuff. Now they basically lie and say that, oh, well, it was because the breed was almost extinct, and so therefore we had to do it for genetic diversity. But obviously that's not true, because if that was true, that same breeding would have been represented in the European stock. So regardless, now people know. And it's kind of catching on in the same way that the bully dogs got confused as pit bulls for many years, and now people know those are not actually pit bulls. And in fact, oddly enough, there's actually been a rise of people breeding the traditional game bred smaller dogs, and I like to see that. I'm not a fan of people using the dogs for fighting, but I do believe that that the breed is worth saving, and that it has redeemable qualities, and that it should be preserved. I do think of most breeds in the way of like they are, in my opinion, it's art. It's like it's a historical artifact, if you will, that should be preserved. And a good breeder recognizes that it is not for them to change it. It is for them to maintain it, to preserve it, to ensure that it will last the length of time. But overall, we are just supposed to be preserving for generations going forward. And so what I find is that more and more people are importing, more and more people are working with European lines. They are moving away. The people that have that American stock are getting outed. There was a really, we went to Italy in 2019, and it was where I really got to realize the truth about the American dogs. Aside from that study, it was very life altering to go to Europe and see all these people, right? Because we were in this closed door meeting with all the heads of the breed club. So we're talking, Italy and Israel and Serbia and Russia and Croatia and France and Brazil and Argentina and all these people, and they have their little flag, and we're sitting there, and I have pictures of this, and they all agree on the same dog. There is no question about the breed, about the type, about any of that stuff, like there is here in America. And so it became very clear what the truth was, what the real dog is. And so what I will say is that, that has been, I think, there's this guy that had been breeding back in the day, and he had American stock. And he went and recently he bought a dog again, and he bought European. He imported. And that's huge. Not only did he import, but I saw him posting, and he was calling out stuff that the American stock does. Like, for example, a Corso should not have a round head. They actually have a square head. There should not be roundness. And he was kind of calling that out. And I was dumbfounded to see a person who was very much a part of that original core American movement of American dogs completely change to the right dogs, to the European dogs, and to publicly do so. I do think there is hope for the breed here. And I will say, I think that there's always going to be people like California. There's a really bad issue with the worst breeders, even worse than I would say like the American breeders, because these people are just flat out, they're just like the bully dog breeders, just like them. They're mixing with all kinds of stuff. They're producing colors that do not exist in our breed, red-nosed dogs, merle dogs, and they don't care. They're not on social media other than like Instagram and things to sell their dogs. They do not have discussions with other breeders. They don't show their dogs. They don't care about any of that. They're just trying to produce big, pretty dogs for the public. That's it. That's all they care about. And those dogs are, it's very sad. And those, that's what I was saying. Those people will always be here until we have more educated and buyers that respect the breed. But in general, I do see a movement towards correct type. And I think that the breed in the end will be fine, because the American stock is extremely limited in genetic diversity, and they can't continue because there's not enough people breeding them, and especially in their purest form. And I say that in quotations because it's, how can a mixed breed be pure? But they will have to. They will not, unless they do what they've always done, which is bring in mixed breed dogs and stuff like that, and they keep mixing. They will not be able to do it without bringing in European stock, because there's just not enough dogs for them to be able to maintain it.
That's really interesting to know. Rachel, thank you so much for joining the show today. I appreciate your time and value your expertise.
Yep.
Guys, if you want to follow Rachel, you can follow her on YouTube at Senza Tempo Cane Corso and Life of Senza, on Instagram and Facebook at Senza Tempo Cane Corso and SenzaTempoCaneCorso.com. Thank you again so much, Rachel.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.